Welcome to What the Actual Dev, the no bullshit development podcast.
No fluff, no marketing, just honest conversations, practical insights, and expert advice from developers who've been in the trenches.
My name is Aaron.
And I'm Brian.
Let's dive deep into the human aspects of the software industry
and support each other on this journey. Thanks everyone for joining this episode of What the Actual Dev. Today we have Ahmed Farag from the App Innovation Cloud Solution Architect sector within Microsoft. He manages a team of these architects to help customers be able to architect solutions through the Azure cloud. I have one of them working on his team and alongside with Ahmed, and we're glad to have you here. Would you like to kind of introduce yourself a little more, Ahmed, and give a little bit of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me, Brian and Aaron. Yeah, so I currently manage solution architects, like you mentioned, focused on what I like to call app dev. Microsoft calls it app innovation. I did this is I'm coming to 2 years now in September, coming back to Microsoft. I did leave the company during the pandemic, and before that, I worked for Microsoft a couple of times. So this is my second time to join Microsoft. Third time, I should say, third time to join Microsoft. I stopped counting.
So you like them that much, huh?
Yes, and I was told there's a limit. There's a limit of how many times you can come back. Guess I need to watch out for that. Yes, and I'm not joking. There's a limit.
Is it like a cat, like 9 lives? So you've used up 3
exactly, right? Yeah, you lost.
You get 4.
You get 4. Yeah. So a little bit of background. So I'm during my tenure at Microsoft, I was always on the side of software development related activities, mostly on the consulting side. Before Microsoft, the first time I was employed by Microsoft, I was also doing software development, either consulting or engineering. I do have a background in software engineering. I do still write code. And I guess the biggest other company that I worked for other than Microsoft was HP, which basically was EDS acquired by HP. And then I worked for other companies, smaller and bigger, and I worked for my own companies, started a few. So the first job I got in software engineering was in 2004 when I graduated from computer science. I'm originally from Egypt. I did my degree in computer science back home in Egypt, even though I lived most of my childhood in Saudi Arabia, where I was born. I'm originally from Egypt. My parents was working there, so I lived there. And I did a few things. I also taught computer science to computer science students in the German university in Cairo for a couple of years. And throughout, I did build a few things on my own, sort of like consulting, made money. I always dreamt about building my own business, and I tried smaller companies and bigger companies along the way. Maybe during my full-time tenure, like working for companies, I did leave 3 big companies to work on my own thing. I think those are 3 monumental times on my journey that I remember really clearly, because those are hard decisions, especially when as you grow older and you have a family and kids and so on, or in the beginning of your life as well. So I did leave HP to form a company called Link, and the idea was to create YouTube before YouTube, but that didn't work out. And I had a partner with me. His name is Narendra Sambai from England. At the time, I was working in England. And then the second time, I left Microsoft in 2008. I think the same year that Bill Gates decided to step down and have Steve Ballmer take over. He was stepped down from the company, but Steve Ballmer was the CEO. And then and I did a few things, a couple of startups, Software Ranger. I also did start the company PhaseGraph, and then I left Microsoft in the pandemic. So these are the 3 times. So I can talk a lot. I'm going to stop here. I know you
No.
may have more questions.
Well, you say you've been to Microsoft multiple times. I'd almost say they're different Microsofts since when you come back, right? You've been in the Gates years, the Balmer years, and Satya years now.
Yes. No, that is true.
Okay.
And I think during the middle period, which was the longest for me, when I joined Microsoft in 2010. That time was when Microsoft was kind of in the low of where they are in terms of stock and activities. When it started thinking about creating the cloud, and Steve Ballmer was there. And I remember 2011, 12, a lot of people were leaving the company. And I was like, I'll stay, I'll hang out. I was hoping for the stock to go up, and I sold all my stocks to buy a house. I wish I didn't. And I saw like different styles of management. Definitely, a lot of changes happened when Satya came in. Maybe I'm one of the few who do give a lot of credit to Steve Ballmer in what he did in the company, because people sometimes forget. And obviously, no doubt, Satya has done a lot of great things.
Yeah. Well, and I see from like a dev perspective too, my experience, like being a C# developer, as we were in the Microsoft technologies,
Yep.
and Aaron's probably going to be on the other side of the table here. When you're working with other web developers and they realize that you are a C# or F# developer, there's kind of a double standard there. They almost don't, it was like all the world standards of web development and then Microsoft standards of web development, and they never really combined well. It was almost like this fission between the two divisions there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
So which side are you on, Aaron? I'm curious.
Well, definitely not the web forms side. I can tell you that
Okay.
much. The web forms sides can die in a fire. But when Brian and I met, and that was actually at a company called No2. I was actually hired on to write PHP code for a C# house because of other things that happened with a company that they were going to buy out that I was a part of. But that didn't happen. So they were like, hey, we're going to bring you on as a senior engineer to write C# code. Once I got back into that side of it, the C# code actually wasn't that bad. I didn't mind that part of it.
Okay.
I don't like the way they were handling the front end pieces of that side. But if you pair the C# code up with like React or not Angular, Vue, something like that, as long as it's not Angular, then it's not actually that bad. So C# I'm not opposed to.
Okay. So it's more of like the ASP.NET.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Got it. All right.
Remember back in the days of CSS, you had to say like, if Edge, do this type of animation. Else,
that
for everyone
shit.
else, do this.
all the versions of browsers, Explorer, all the versions, and you have to write for all of those versions.
Yeah.
And I remember, if you go back in the days, like if I was like, okay, nice, I like that. Okay. Yeah, and I was saying like there has been. I remember clearly when you guys talked about ASP and ASP.NET being the other side of web development, and maybe that's a topic. Maybe we can talk about a little bit. The interviews, like how the tech industry, how did the engineering jobs interviews evolve? Because I feel like they have been almost the same since a very long time ago. And what I just want to remember, there has been a lot of questions about ASP and ASP.NET. I did interview also people because I was a dev lead. I worked for a project in England. I was leading a team building RBAC control, rollback access control system for a bank called ABN AMRO. And I always ask people about, okay, how can you, what I want to remember, because that was a long time ago. It's just how do you manage, objects or variables, data you want to manage on the level of a session? How can you do it on the level of page? And how can you do it on the level of a server? So this is the session state. I think the other one was called like the view state, and then there's one more for the whole server, essentially, for the whole website, and application state. Yeah, and so a lot of those questions were really common, and like you said, that was very specific to how Microsoft built their web development at the time. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, it's got to be interesting to be part of that process of Microsoft changing from, say, the .NET framework, where it was really Windows centric, Windows based. We'll call it Windows. I always called it Windows standards when I was developing. I was like, you have the world standards of web development, and you have Microsoft standards of development, and you have to match. But now they're very agnostic. To the point of their Azure DevOps platform. Their motto is program anything and deploy anywhere. They really encompassed a lot of the standards and kind of help now to these days create those standards and processes for all like web development in the space they sit in.
Well, and I think they kind of had to because they were starting to get left behind on some things. And I mean, them buying out GitHub and them, introducing VS Code. I mean, those were two big things that really helped them because, I mean, I use VS Code exclusively now. Like, I used to use PHP Storm and WebStorm and all of that. And VS Code does everything I need it to. And that's GitHub is like the quintessential. I fucking hate GitLab and all the like Bitbucket and like all the others. So
tell us how you really feel, Aaron.
Oh, has that ever been a problem, Brian? But I mean, like when it comes to that, I mean they expertly position themselves, which is what Microsoft is really good at. Like they're not so great at always reading the trends in the way they should go, but they're always really well at once the trends are set and they're like, oh shit, we kind of missed the boat on that one. We should position ourselves to take advantage of this, and that's exactly what they did. And I think that's really like that's when C# and all of that stuff really started breaking out into okay, it's becoming way more of a web based thing again instead of .NET. Because I mean, you had the Telerik.
Yeah,
is that how you said it?
Telerik.
Yeah,
controls.
You had the Telerik control.
Yep. Telerik
like
controls.
trying to get all that implemented was just a pain in the ass, and like
it's like pre-Bootstrap frameworks, and
exactly
like right before the responsive design era of web development.
Yeah.
That tells you how long ago I used it.
Yeah. Well, and back to Ahmed, like you're talking about those interview questions, when you did a C# or let's say ASP.NET web developer interview question, you didn't really ask a lot of world standards. You asked framework specific skill sets.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Because if you couldn't work the framework in unique parts, then it was like that's a whole nother level of understanding and skills, let alone understanding how the web world works. But,
well, and I think that's actually good because we've moved away from that, or at least from my perspective as an engineering manager and actually interviewing for positions, at least for me. I mean, obviously, I'd like to hear what you've kind of done lately, Ahmed. Is that like with a full stack, we're definitely asking a lot broader of a question. We're not asking framework dependent pieces unless it's like, okay, we need someone that's like experienced in Kafka or something like that. Unless it's like directly related to that one tool, we're asking way broader questions.
No, that makes sense, and I think that's the evolution. I think we throughout like the years that we have seen in software engineering or development, there has been tremendous change, and because it's all in the past, sometimes we forget. But yeah, if we just talk about security, for example, there was no OAuth, there was no OpenID, remember? So we were talking about people building their own tables for users, and they will handle their own security. And there was NTLM and Kerberos. That's the other end. It was crazy, right? And very little was being asked about security in the early days. Now it's sort of like the world is, they came around maybe more fixed industry around security. Same thing, with languages. Now, if you know how to program, if you know how to write code, if you know the basics, it doesn't matter which language that you're using, unless the company is using something very specific and they need someone to hit the ground running. And in that case, yes, they will ask you if you know embedded C++, for example, because they need someone we can just do that now. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think I find one of the most challenging, and I kind of talked a little bit before about how I was criticizing the engineering interviews. On the other side, I think it's very challenging to be able to find the right talent. Um, and you bear a big responsibility to do it right. So the way that I sort of like approach this, and I was trying to think, how can I avoid some of the mistakes that I've seen. And I've been through a lot of interviews as an engineer where I failed, where I feel like, oh man, I could have done it. Actually, I remember one where I applied for a software engineering job in Microsoft. I was working in Microsoft at the time, and a lot of my friends, but I was not in part of the engineering. I was part of the services side, and I start getting those questions. Um, one of them was about, I think it was about something to do with tree, like rearrange a binary tree or something like that. I can't remember. You might get a problem that you can't really solve on the spot, which doesn't really mimic the real life. You never, as a developer, get a problem and then you'll be asked to just solve it, build an algorithm, or write some code on the spot. You usually do think about it, look around. So what companies have been doing, and this is something that makes sense. Companies usually try to look at the engineer and see how they can think. Are they problem solvers? So not necessarily you have to solve the problem, but they want to look at that, which is not true a lot of the times. A lot of times, if you don't come out with a good solution and then you can optimize it and tell them like what's the ON for this one and how can you make it better, you don't pass. So what I ended up doing in one of my companies that I founded, which is FaceGraph, we usually we do, obviously we go through like screening and then we have a short list, and through that short list we give them a problem, and that problem we write it down. It's usually closer to what we're looking for, but we try to hit something that the candidates have not done before. And a good example would be like, we want to build this little function that would store this type of information in an app. If we're hiring an app developer, for example, like a phone app developer, and we want you to use S3. If the candidates have used Azure, for example, we'll just change it up. And we tell them, we ask them if they have a specific time where they can be free for 12 hours, and then we'll just give them that assignment. And we will have maybe a pool of 20 people. We give them the assignment, and then the clock starts ticking for that 12 hours or a day, whatever we think it is. We usually try to give them twice the time we think it takes, and then they work on it and they come back to us. And we usually use this as the way to kind of find like the top 4 or 5, because what we do is we look at their first. Obviously a bunch won't do it, and not because they can't, just because they don't want to put the effort. This usually works for first grads. Obviously, like if you have a senior person, they will tell you, no, go away, I don't have time for this. So we don't really do this with senior people. We try to do this usually with junior people when we're trying to hire, especially first grads. And yeah, you end up with a smaller group of people who solve the problem mostly by themselves. You meet with them, you discuss the solution, you can look at their style of code. We also tell them, we have a lot of things that we tell them. We tell them we're not really looking for perfection. Don't worry about, you don't have to use, you don't have to go crazy on the code and comments. We understand that things like this, don't get OCD so much about that. Just get it done. Show us how you do things, and we will discuss it. You can tell us, I wanted to do this in this way, but I haven't had time. Design patterns, all these things. It's okay. And this is, and it turns out to be helpful, because a lot of times you end up running into people who are good, and then you do the interview after, and then you can make your decision. So this is how I approach this. I don't know how you do it, Aaron, um, but I feel this gives an opportunity for people to show their experience.
Honestly, like I'm way different on it, and it's
Okay.
not because I don't necessarily agree with the way you handle it. I actually do. Um, but I'm weird in that I've learned that you can teach someone code all day long. But
Yep.
the first thing that I focus on is whether or not they're going to fit with the team. Um, because if they aren't going to fit with the team, they aren't going to fit with the company culture. It doesn't matter what you
Regardless.
can teach them; they're going to cause problems. And I've kind of like worked my way into that idea of hire fast, fire fast. Like it's a lot easier to get them in the door, be like, okay, they seem like they're a cultural fit. They seem like they have the knowledge, ask them questions that, they either have to actually think about or they're going to be able to Google and actually put thought into.
Hmm.
Um, and then, get them in the door, see what they can do actually contributing to the actual code that the company is working on. And if they don't work out in the first week, 2 weeks, first month, move on to the next candidate. Um, I mean, it sucks because it does kind of get them in the door and get them like a little like I it,
Give him some
it
hope, and then he just stop
yeah,
it.
yeah, and I mean, but I mean, it's also it can be combated if you go into that situation with, look, we're going to give you this opportunity. You are on probation. We're going to see how you do with the
Exactly.
code. And if it doesn't seem like you're cutting it, we're going to have to let you go, but we want to give you this opportunity. And I think if you approach it in that way, then you're giving them the opportunity to show you what they can do. Because I'm weird about giving them code interviews because it's not a real life scenario, in my opinion. Like,
Yep.
you
Exactly.
can give them a code, like, hey, go code this API interface. Okay, well, I can Google that and have you at a code API interface, or I can go in and have VS Code use GitHub Copilot
Yep.
spit one out in 30 minutes, and that's not going to prove anything.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Well,
that's
I would
opinion.
say having your AI tools too, right, is going to revolutionize this type of
It will
interviewing
change things.
process. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because from my experiences too, and it feels very familiar with yours, is like it's hard to nail the bullseye on a programmer interview. And really, you think about interviewing for any other role in the professional world, it's very easy to kind of check boxes and make sure you're skilled and talented. But in programming, you can even have the skills to program, but not be able to apply where this particular company is implementing the code base, or that mixture of culture and skill. It's kind of paradoxical in my mind of just like the endless search for the perfect interview process for a programmer. And there's so many different ways of doing it that I don't think any of us have landed on what that perfect process is.
Yeah. And that is true. And I think it's you want to look at the different levels you're hiring for differently. I think also in the interview process versus just be the same, where
Mhm.
you have a problem, you ask them to do it, you ask them to improve it, you thank them, and you leave. It doesn't make sense. I think it does not make sense. And I think there will be a revolution now in how things are being done, since the productivity and the ability for developers to do more now with all those AI tools has changed. Um, so I think this gotta change. It's
Yeah.
gonna
I
be
used I used to be the fastest for loop writer in the West, but now with GitHub Copilot, I'm obsolete. So,
yeah.
Well,
fun.
it's funny because we just had a friend of mine, Nick McGee, on. He's actually on the episode that's coming out tomorrow, and he's pretty versed in AI, and we were actually talking about how AI is kind of revolutionizing a lot of things, including learning. Um, and it's one of the key things that we focused on in that podcast episode was that it's not necessarily about the fact of it being used; it's in how it's being used. Like, so
Right.
how Brian and I would use it is completely different than how a junior engineer would use it, and how we utilize the output from it is completely different than what a junior engineer would use.
Yeah, that's true. And I think I feel like AI in general um, is just like any other tool. You can the way there is an art on or maybe a science on how you can use it and get the most out of it. That's one of the things that when I founded FaceGraph in 2017, I think it was top of mind. What we did is we used we really didn't create AI models, but we just used existing facial recognition AI models, and I think we did it the best at the time, where we just used it for attendance tracking. But when I say this now, this seems to be like, oh yeah, of course, because I remember when we started, it was almost every month we see a new company pop out to just do something with facial recognition. Uber using facial recognition to verify that the driver is to verify
Who
the
they
identity
are.
for this, yeah, who they are exactly, and they use also facial recognition. And I think the way that we use AI mattered and made our company maybe relevant. The fact that we try to make it completely seamless. You don't really have to stop to take a picture. You don't feel like you're taking a picture. It's just running in the background, and there's a lot of code that we put that makes sure that we can take a stable picture while the system is running. We can analyze it and then get a response, similar to what is being done today with like Apple ID and all of these things. Is what matters. That what makes a difference. Same thing with what you're saying. How you can use an LLM today in a beneficial way. One person can use it in a way, and some person can use it in a completely different manner, which is more useful. I think it really that's the game changer. And there's so many startups now out there that are trying to do this. They're trying to use AI.
Do you think that, so you think from a marketing standpoint, right? And like the point of our products, like in the trenches, what the dev. When you think AI, think facial recognition, all these companies coming out with their own version of it. When I hear it as a consumer, I think, okay, facial recognition is facial recognition. But for you and your team there at FaceGraph, like, is it hard to try to leverage AI but be different in the market and how to present that difference in the market?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely not easy because when you use AI. So one of the examples I always talk about when we built our first prototype, I was telling the team the way we want to use facial recognition and AI in our programs is just very similar to you going to a club. If you go to a club and it's a gated community, a gated club, you have someone standing at the gate. They see you the first time before the invention of cards and stuff like that. They recognize who you are. You go into a gym, they recognize who you are. They let you in. It's different from, it's they don't really stand up and then keep looking at you and staring at your face, and then
You
thinking,
didn't have
oh
that
my
mold there last
god.
time. Are
Exactly,
you
right.
really you?
It's very seamless, right? And that's how I kind of think about some of the apps that were out at the beginning. You have to stand in a very specific location. You have to pause, they have to take a picture of you. That's very intrusive, so it has to be very seamless. And in order to do this on devices with different capabilities, with different lighting, different people complexions, like very white people always fail, very dark people always fail, all of these things, it's not really easy because you're asking those people to just be themselves and just walk. So yes, there is an incredible amount of vision analysis and engineering that goes before you send the image to the model, and then the model has to be really good. So yeah, it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing what Apple has done, for example, with Apple ID. If you look at AWS and what they've done with recognition and what Microsoft has done with cognitive services, it's pretty good. One of the things that happened during the pandemic, for example, which was a problem, people wearing masks and having half of their face covered.
Yeah.
And then that just threw facial recognition away. So Apple was able to introduce a version very late in the pandemic where you can enable Face ID with a mask. But also Microsoft has added mask detection in cognitive services. AWS added in recognition, their service for facial recognition, they added mask detection. And I can argue they did it very successfully because they obviously have a huge training set, bigger than everybody else, which makes the service practical, meaning you can use it, you can rely on it. So yeah, I think I digressed a little bit, but this is definitely an important a key element to AI. If AI becomes very useful, very practical, people will use it. Otherwise, people will move on.
Yeah. Well, how do you market yourself different from, like, say, another competitor that says, because it said we talk generally of like facial recognition AI. I do it, you do it. In the market from a consumer, it's like, why would I pick one over the other? Have you seen the difficulty in trying to stand out in that realm? Because, like you said, you implement facial recognition in a different flow and logic pattern. I feel like,
Yeah,
with marketing, you kind of generalize it all. So it's like, what does that really mean? And how can you
it
leverage
is.
one for the other?
I think at some point, especially like in 2018, 19, 20, when companies, it became mainstream with the introduction of Face ID, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's so many people who do it and they do it really well. Uh, and I'm talking about the like in the commercial business, not in the law enforcement. Those guys have been doing it for a long time. They've done it really well. It's not really, yeah, like they
They
have
haven't quite
very,
opened
very,
their services up for us to use it in an API call.
they
Thanks,
didn't,
Uncle
right?
Sam.
Yeah.
Exactly. Uncle Sam was really advanced. But if we look at commercial, it wasn't popular. But when it became popular, I think, to your point, it was mostly marketing is what can get your product through. One of the things that, so we often attended almost every year. Um, one of the biggest segments we sell to is schools. That we started with schools, then we did businesses and offices, then factories. So we go to a conference in England for education. It's a very big one. Microsoft also exhibits there. When you go to Europe specifically, there are a lot of concerns about privacy. There are a lot of concerns about facial recognition, to the point that some countries, because you have many countries represented there, some of those people coming from those countries will just not even stop by the booth. Like, no, I was like, I'm not showing porn here. This is a product. Thank you.
No, no.
Yeah. So what we thought about is how can we address that? So one of the things I think we did, which was very successful, we've promoted this concept of imageless facial recognition, and it was very popular. And what we did is nothing. It's not magical. All of those existing models, what they do is they basically take an image and measure all the features of the face, like the eyes, the eyebrows, the nose, and then they do a search in a database to do the matching. They don't really need the image. So once the image is taken, they use AI machine learning to find those features, and then once they're found, we have all the locations and the sizes of those features, and that's what's stored. So what I ended up doing is I can give a customer a feature where they can go with imageless facial recognition. In that case, no image is stored, so we don't store any image in the cloud or on premise, and we just keep the model and we keep the measurements and we just conduct facial recognition. Obviously, the downside of this is that if we have a newer model version, they will have to do the retrain. To do the retraining, they have to take some. So they have to do retraining. They have to take more images to be able to retrain. So there's a downside for it, but it was popular because a lot of people, when they hear imageless facial recognition and you explain to them what we do, they're like, "Oh, this is great. That's awesome. I
Yeah.
like it. I don't want my images to be anywhere." So
Well,
yeah,
it seems like an easy way to describe your customers that may have a gap of technology understanding to be like, oh,
yes,
yeah, or privacy is not an issue there. Because that's the thing. I think from consumers, like the knowledge of a consumer and capability of technology is such a major gap when you get into AI and these facial recognitions and kind of these automated processes. And then you think about securities or privacy security. All of a sudden, you can get a lot of alarm bells to go off, conspiracy theories, or the
yeah,
Minority Report vibes, where like you walk into the Gap and they scan your eyeball and they know it's you and your last purchases and whatnot. in that sense. So it feels like an easy way to kind of close that fear gap, I guess would be a way.
I think I'm like the one person that's just like, wait, you can put a microchip in my arm and I can just pay for something? Sign me up. Like,
Yeah, right. Exactly.
like I don't have to carry a wallet that I have to basically look for every time I fucking go to leave. Like, come where? Like, just sign me up.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, Aaron. Like we saw this the both spectrum. Like we found, so we first started deploying it to a lot of schools. So we had almost 100 schools, a lot of them here in California because we're here. And we talked to the parents. Most likely, it's for younger schools like daycares. And we do it with parents, not kids. So parents will come and it recognize them, it shows them the list of their kids, and just get them checked out and checked in. So a lot of the parents will come and say, "Oh, this is beautiful. We love it. We don't have to enter a number. We don't have to go through like a book or whatever." And some other parents, they just don't like it. They say, "No, I don't want it. I don't want my picture in there. This is crazy." We had one lady send us a letter saying that according to California law, you have to surrender all the images, and you have to, like, she almost sued us, and we had to obviously go delete everything that all the, even though she left the school and so on. Like there are people who are very paranoid, and there are people who are really excited.
She's probably super paranoid, but still has the Facebook app on her smartphone while she's carrying that around and being
Right?
tracked
Yeah,
left and right.
exactly. You want to ask them, like, are you sure you're not using that somewhere else? But yeah, I mean, some people are like that. I think this applies to all tech. Like people
Mhm.
will just, yeah, people.
Yeah.
I had people from Sweden stop by the booth, and they literally threatened me. They said, "Do you know that the EU laws that allow doing this with children?" I was like, "Oh, do you know what you're doing is not allowed? Have you spoken to this?" And then, yeah, it's you see all that. I think it's that's the challenge.
Yeah.
You build an electric car like Tesla, and you do like autonomous driving, and you know that some people might die. Like imagine if everybody is really worried about like there is a balance, I guess.
Yeah.
Like if
Yeah.
if you if you if you're too scared, there's no innovation. If you're too loose and too liberal and very adventurous, obviously mistakes will happen,
Yeah.
which will lives.
What I
Yeah,
mean, to think that you're going to create a moving vehicle, whether autonomous or not autonomous, and that it's not going to potentially
exactly,
kill something.
exactly.
I don't understand how to respond to that. Like, of course it could possibly kill something or
Yes,
someone. It's fucking moving. Like
yes,
Yeah.
like
exactly.
Well,
it I don't know. I
yeah.
don't know.
Well, and I go back. So before I worked at Microsoft, I had a stint at an AI company where they would we called Lifetime, and they would track vehicles through the traffic cameras through the
Mm,
valley. And for first responders, right? So if you had, say, a kidnapping, and someone called 911 and said, "Hey, my child was kidnapped, and they were driving a blue SUV from this location that happened this, minutes ago, or at this time." They had a way of figuring out, okay, here's the radius, the diameter they could have traveled, and we're going to check the cameras for that car, and then we're going to backtrack that car to see if it started at that source where the kidnapping was announced. And he was kind of cloak and dagger because it was a startup. So the way they market it and advertise it, it talks about all this AI and this recognition technology, and everyone was so scared that the privacy state and that we were taken over. I'm like, we literally were saying blue truck, green car, and and through a human's eyes, a human in the loop, looking at that in video, going, "Hey, there's a blue sedan." That was in the report. Let's backtrack and make sure it's the same blue sedan from here. And they had a way of stitching the cameras together going backwards. So it was really cool to watch, from someone, myself, that loves the innovation aspect of it, and seeing like, hey, what we could accomplish from it. But at the same time, if they could have marketed it differently and kind of opened the Komodo on those details, say, hey, this is how we're doing it, I think the fear would go away. But then your competition would be right there from a business standpoint. So it's like you gain customers, but now your competition knows exactly all your proprietary processes, like you do face graph and how you built the logic out. And so I think it's a hard juxtaposition between marketing AI and trying to fill this fear from it while implementing at the same time. Yeah, I couldn't
Yeah.
imagine trying that dance. And I'm not a dancer, so it's hard.
No, absolutely. I think what you said is true. It applies to a lot of software business that we do today. You can really track it. Like a lot of the software we do touch human, and some people are conservative, some people aren't.
Yeah.
So is spacecraft still around? Like, are you still actively running it?
It's still around. I am not really running it. So I have a good team that works with the company. Now the company is going through, I would say, the third wave of the products. It's supposed to release a new product, which is also related to what we're doing. We had like ups and downs like any other company, and surprisingly, we had a lot of good revenue and production during pandemic. Uh, Even though at the beginning of the pandemic was a big disaster because nobody was going to anywhere, so we were not really attendance. Yeah, but we were
Yeah.
able to pivot and create devices and help with the temperature measurement and bundle it with attendance. So that was helped us a lot. And then now they're working on what we call attendance verification and attendance tracking by camera. So the product they're working on today is going to be a software and a hardware. So the hardware is called FaceGraph NVR box. We call it FaceGraph X. It's essentially just a device that you plug in to the wall. It connects to your Wi-Fi, on premise, and it allows you to connect to existing CCTV cameras. So if you have cameras on premise, it will connect to them, and it uses two common protocols that most of the cameras use today to do that: NTSP and OnVIF. And those two, when it connects to them, it essentially listens to the feed, so it takes the stream down to the through the box up to the cloud to do analyze it and then do attendance verification, attendance tracking. So it does the same two things that we do, but that was sort of like the vision that we wanted to do from the beginning, where we want to eliminate tablets and devices and just rely on existing cameras. So this is in the works. It hasn't been released yet. And yeah, we did downsize our team a little bit in 2022. So we have a smaller team that's working on that product for about 2 years now. Hopefully it comes out. And we still have existing customers that use our system.
Awesome. So you're not a day to day necessarily, but you're still a big part of it. So that's still
No,
pretty interesting.
I am not. Actually, I left Microsoft to be focused because when I left Microsoft in, I think it was 2022, that's when I had to step back and go focus on the company because I had like important people leave. I had the head of development left, the head of testing also left. So I had to step back and focus on trying to hire new people and get things up the ground, and this happened. And then during this, we had also like the sort of like the economy downturn a little bit, or I don't know what we call it, but stock market crashed a little bit, and I was thinking I need to do something different. I want to get away from software. So during that time also, after I was able to get a good management that it took over the company, um, I started doing food and beverage. So I started a little venture there, which I found a lot more stress free. It's less stressful and more enjoyable. So um, that was a good move.
Man,
That's
jack of all
awesome.
trades.
What I think that kind of feeds into what we've talked about before, uh, Brian, and that a lot of engineers, when they get up there in the years, they eventually start moving away from development. They're like, "Fuck, what can I do to get away from this?" And that's something that a lot of junior engineers don't really, they don't really see. They're just like, "I'm gonna do this, the rest of my life. Like, I love this stuff." And it's just like, I still enjoy code. I still like getting in there and like figuring out the problems. But when you're doing it day in and day out, you're just like, I want to disappear into the woods and never look at another line of code. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely right in line with that.
Yeah, I think it's something that all engineers should watch out for, because we don't really we don't I mean, you get stressed out. It does have a big toll on your life, and I always tell people, especially the ones who are kind of closer to where I am, like getting closer to in the beginning of the 40s, getting closer there, is that a good measure of the stress is how much hair you still have in your head and how much of it is still, not white. The more white hair you get, that means the more stressed you are. And I mean, I'm not really, living to work at the moment. I'm working to live. So I think it's important to watch out for this. Look, I never thought I'm going to open a restaurant, but I did. I did open a cafe, and the striking thing is, obviously a lot of learning. It's huge. Like, hiring is different. People are weird. It's just not the same, right? It's not the same. People really, they come in and out. They want to do a job and leave. There's no, like, you can't grow people in their roles and stuff. But when you stand out there and you deal with customers just come in and take their orders and they leave, I feel like it's very soothing. It's very cool that the biggest problem you can have is you run out of ice. Like, this is the major disaster. That's a
Yeah.
production outage. Like, you run out of ice. And, and,
Yeah.
and all you have to do is just go run to Safeway and get like another bag of ice, and then the problem is solved. People and store manager are freaking out. I'm like, oh man, this is beautiful. This is the life. I
This
want
is
my
this is
production outage to be like
tangible
this.
failure. I can touch
Exactly.
this failure. Yeah. Well, and as you talk about, starting your boba tea and the cafe, I feel like there's a lot of characteristics from being a programmer that has led to you to be successful in those other ventures. Being able to take digest the big problems and break it down step by step and assimilate, physically what's happening to all these areas within your cafe to make sure, hey, everything's working together. You can see the holistic picture. Do you feel that, like, your background in software engineering has kind of helped do the cafe? Do you think that would be a different outcome if you weren't a developer?
I think it helped and it didn't help in the same time. I mean, the more now I'm almost 2 years or so in this. The more I think about it, it's just a different business. I think the biggest learning is definitely people. When you hire people for minimum wage, which is the normal, by the way, I'm not doing this because I'm trying to be greedy. You hire people for minimum wage. They are paid hourly as baristas. They come in and they just want to do their job and leave. Now, if you do this for your own company now, like working in a software company, you're hiring people, like Aaron said, you want to teach them programming, you want them to grow, they have aspiration, they have ownership, you expect them to, give more. If there's a problem, they'll stay longer. That's not the case in food and beverage. It's people are paid the minimum wage. They'll give you the minimum. You'll just
Yeah.
get the minimum, right? So it's really hard to optimize labor. It's really hard to think the same way where you have a team and you're so attached to it. It's not the same. It's different. I think that's just one thing that you have to learn. Obviously, like, having the perseverance and the patience, the ability to solve problems, and think about solutions definitely help you with the business. There's no doubt. But I think the more important side is all your tech background does help. Having a good phone system and having good cameras and all of that, and POS, and like backup for the internet and backup for the backup. You probably overdo it, but it really helps. Like, it
Yeah.
does help, because usually people in that industry, they have no clue. Um, so yeah, I think it really helps. But it really helps if you also have someone who has experience, like anything else. You want to have someone who has experience in the field to be able to learn from. Um, and you combine your experience with them, and you definitely get a lot of benefit of both.
Yeah. Did you go into the cafe or the boba store with a partner that was in the food and beverage industry or had history there?
So, well, my partner is he also worked for tech. He worked for Facebook and Microsoft for a long time. He was one of the he owned the team that built Facebook Messenger Kids. So he's just a techie, just like me, very, very similar background. But I learned that we are also very different in how we handle business. So, but we had partnership with a company that does have a lot of experience in that because we did open a franchise. So that helps a lot.
Sweet.
Well, I think you actually brought up a good point though, in that if you pay someone minimum wage, you're going to get minimum wage work. But I think that's something that we're actually seeing a lot more move into the tech industry as well. I mean, obviously they're not getting paid minimum wage, but at the same time, um, you know, unless they own a part of the business, which not everybody should. I'm not advocating for that. I know there's been a big push for, everybody having equity in a company, which
Yes.
I don't necessarily agree with all the time. I mean, obviously it has its pros and its cons. But it's like that concept of course they're not going to have buy-in. They're not going to put in the hours and everything that you do if you own the company, if they don't also own the company. And I think that's a kind of like working its way over from that service industry mentality. And honestly, I don't disagree with it necessarily. I mean, I worked in service industry. I mean, I can't even count how many times I worked at McDonald's. They definitely don't have a limit, by the way. You can work there as many times as you want. Um, I know of at least six. But like I think that definitely has worked its way over, and like it's not necessarily a bad thing, and I don't think that people should expect that from their engineers or from anyone in the tech industry. It's like, unless you're giving them a reason to feel like they own the company, don't expect them to act like they own the company.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what? It's kind of funny because you mentioned that because we come from that industry, like the software companies, which are very looking at all other kinds of jobs. We kind of blessed, right? We work in nice offices. We can work remotely. We can work from home. Not all jobs are like that, right? And we take it for granted. Um, and we think about things like that, where you can have an equity in the company. We actually offered that to people, and they were like, "What? No, just give me cash."
That doesn't
you
help
know,
me now.
yeah, like, oh, this is great. We love it. I'd like to get cash. I do like your idea of getting like a company's takes, but no. And we did this with managers also. People kind of like the idea, but because a lot of those people are also very, they're all fresh grads. They're just keen, or some of them are still college students. They just want cash.
Yeah.
We thought the opposite. We thought we give them equity, they'll be excited, they'll be part of the business. I think it probably works for higher ranked people or maybe older people. Um, but yeah, I think those things are very smart. Having an equity in a company definitely makes you. I actually tried to do this in FaceGraph. It worked really well in my second startup, which is PortMe. We didn't have a lot of cash, so we obviously relied heavily on equity, and we were able to get very smart people to work for us, owning mostly equity but less cash. That works really well in tech.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think that in like a service industry type of mentality, it's like it's harder to do that because if they're working for minimum wage, it's like, dude, I got a family to feed.
Yeah,
I can't be a
exactly.
part owner if I can't feed my family.
Yes, exactly. You're right. What I'm going to do with that equity? Like it's nothing.
Yeah.
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 Well, and I think our field's unique too in the sense that you see so many unicorns show up as businesses where you're like, well, if I have equity and this turns out to be the grand slam, I am set. Mark Zuckerberg, watch out, I'm moving in next door. You don't get that in a lot of other fields, quickly as we've seen. I think say the early 2000s to now, we had a lot of those stars, a lot of those unicorns, a lot of money going around, Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and, all these big tech companies from Silicon Valley that I think they had a sweet era of where there were a lot of billionaire unicorns coming out, these startups that even at myself at the beginning of my career was like, oh man, if you could find that one rocket ship to cling on to, you would take equity because it would change your life down the road. But how many times do you swing and strike out compared to hitting the grand slam to, and then not being in our field. It's very rare. So yeah, cash is king. Give me the money now.
Well, I mean, I think that's why a lot of people, end up trying to start their own things. Like when you're
Yeah.
in an industry like ours, they're like, well, if I can't latch onto this other person's thing that's going to make me the money I want to make so that I can get out of this field, or, whatever it is that their end goal is, retire to Tahiti or whatever, then I'm going to start my own thing. I'm going to make this happen on my own. And, obviously I've tried to do it. Like I know that obviously Ahmed's tried to do it. Brian, you've tried to do it. Like it's hard to do. And like it's hard to do because like we've had those expectations set by things like Facebook and Uber
Yep.
and things like that. So
I think on the flip side also is that companies, big companies especially, they try to use equity and benefits as a way to retain employees, which is understandable. And if I go back in time, um, an advice for me, the younger me, is to watch out for that, because I remember before I joined Microsoft in 2020, 2010, the second time. Before that, I used to work for companies for about a year. Like I never really, stayed more than a year. I used to work for different companies. It just hop between companies, not really intentionally, but it just happens. Like I get bored. I was still young. I want to try something different. But then I joined Microsoft and I had no intention to stay a long time, but I stayed for almost 10 years or something like that, or 12 before I left. And then I look back. I mean, yeah, they make it really nice. They give you, stocks, and those stocks vest over time, and you keep vesting, and you get some good, compensation package. And I think I don't remember the name of the author, Zero to One. He was one of uh, the PayPal mafia, a very very famous guy.
Peter Thiel.
Yeah, Peter Thiel, exactly. He talks about that a lot. He talks about how companies use that as a technique to keep you in the company, but also sometimes they want to keep you because you're not good, but just because they are worried that when you leave, you're going to create something that disrupts their business. And I think my advice is you need to watch out for that. If you're in a very early stage of your career, money shouldn't be the decision maker for you to stay. Uh, if you feel comfortable and you're working in a job, I was traveling, I was like everywhere, and I felt really happy. I was like, oh man, I'm accomplished. I'm gonna stay. If if you feel that this is happening, not really progressing in your career, you're not doing something big that you felt you want to do, just leave. Find something else, and then you can get the stability later in your life. I think that would be something. If I go back, I would change.
Yep. I would absolutely agree with that. And I I definitely like it's usually been about 1 to 2 years. I, at least early in my career,
Hmm.
it was usually like, oh well, this company is willing to pay me more, so I'm going to go here. And then I happened upon the company that it was a startup that I helped co-found based around another company, and I was there for 5 years, I think.
Hmm.
And like ultimately, it was a great company. We raised a large amount of money. We had 150 something people, but then literally I get a phone call on a Sunday night and they're like, hey, we're closing this company down tomorrow. And
Exactly.
just like that, 150 people lose their jobs. And since then I've had 3 jobs in 2 years because of layoffs. It's like it can all change at the drop of
Yes.
a hat. So like, what do you do with that? Like, how do you handle that? And now we have, literally companies laying people off in droves. I mean, like Sony today, 900 people. I mean,
Yes.
that's insane.
Yeah.
I can't wrap my head around it.
Which is the reality. Like business is always going to take care of a business.
Yep.
They'll. There's no attachment, and I think we need to think about it that way. It took me a while to think that way, to be honest. You can love your job, you can love your company, but you need to think what's good for you. It's
Yep.
pretty hard when you're fresh out of college where you were making nothing and you started making some good money. It feels weird. It doesn't feel counter. I remember when I left my first full time job in HP. even though I mean I left it and I started a company and we were funded, I always get nightmares of like, how did I leave this company? What did I do? I ran out of money. What am I gonna do? I need to get married. Like it was crazy. Even though it's hard. It's just hard. But I think it's very important in having the mentality of making sure you're not attached, just like companies. In our field it's important because in our field that medium is there where you can be in a company for many years. And it's funny to talk about this now because a lot of people can't find jobs now, and like you said, there's so many layoffs. This is not the time to do that. This is the time to start a company, just to be clear. Yeah.
Concrete to the floor.
Yeah. And then when it gets better, yeah, start moving around. It's such a tough time that we're in today. I mean, it's much better now, but yeah, I don't think we're out of the woods yet.
Well, and it's weird because if you think about it, from when I'm not sure how old y'all's parents, y'all, God, you can tell I'm from the South. I'm not sure how old your parents are, but for my parents' generation, they were like, no, you got to stay in the same company for this
Yeah,
long of a time. Like you've got to like make sure you have a pension. I mean, the pension would have been nice because honestly, right now, I'm never going to be able to fucking retire. I'm going to die working. But it's like it's completely different than it
it's
was
the
back then.
opposite.
Like, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
My
it's,
father, I think my father worked 55 years in his company, something like that. Yeah,
that's
he
insane.
worked a very long time, very
yeah,
very long time, just the same job. you know, yeah,
yeah.
50, 40, 45 years. It's crazy.
See, my father was a little different. He was a government worker. He was a state trooper in California, highway patrol officer. So yeah, he had his pension. Like he worked his 27 years, retired, and now is living off of that, just
27
because
years.
of
Yeah,
his, what his setup was with the government, the state government. His family, it's a totally different approach. Their finances approach is totally different than mine because they said it's a different volatility of what we have to worry about. And I like your idea, Ahmed, there at the beginning of like your comments have really come to fruition with being self reliant. And I try to tell junior engineers and when I go talk to high schools and colleges when they're about to graduate what it takes to be a software engineer. And they always think, oh, you're an engineer, you must be really smart. And it's like, no, really, it's just you have a lot of grit, a lot of perseverance, and you're always willing to keep learning and staying on top of your skill set so you don't become obsolete while things change. I mean, we are on a cusp of AI, that not only has this AI if totally scalped the industry of layoffs and people sitting around, it's going to change the way we work, our skill sets, our tools, like we talked about at the beginning, to where this is the moment where we need to look at ourselves, look inward, and figure out where our skills are to make sure that we are relevant next year and I don't have to go apply to your cafe and become a waiter. I like there's certain iterations of that evolution. I feel like we are on the cusp of one of those where this
yeah.
whole program is going to get a facelift of how we function, how we work, what innovation really is, qualified as, and we got to buckle up and get on top of it, or we're going to get left behind.
I'm
Which doesn't.
personally, I'm
Good.
personally like welcoming our AI overlords. Like,
See, the only thing James Cameron had wrong is he called it in Terminator. The company was called Skynet, but Microsoft called it Copilot. So that's the only difference I'm seeing so far. but
yeah.
yeah,
No,
no,
it's true.
yeah, it's
I
fun.
think you also touched on a good point. A lot of people ask that question. I haven't written code before. Can I be an engineer? And I think, can I be a software developer? Yeah, I think, if you like to be one, you can. I always bring that example where I went to a customer who works in the healthcare industry. As I went to them as a Microsoft consultant, that person was around 55 years old, I think, in the 50s, and he was basically doing SharePoint custom development. And to do SharePoint custom development, exactly right. You have to know OAuth. You have to know how to do web service calls and wire them up with like uh, .NET and whatever, right? And you have to host your code in Azure, but then I frame it inside. It's just it's really
That's
a lot.
the inner worlds of Microsoft technology.
It's the dirty inner world of Microsoft
Yeah,
technology.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
really tough. And that person, when I asked him, what did you do before? He said, I was 35 years. He was a paramedic. He was a paramedic almost for the entirety of his career. He used to, basically drive those big fire trucks. And he also was paramedic, and he also flew helicopters. And then he decided to start a career in tech. And he decided to learn software programming, and he went to SharePoint development. It was very inspirational to me. Like, I was so inspired. Like, how did you do it? You know, I struggled to learn custom SharePoint development when I started, and I had a lot of software development experience. And I think that's just a good example of, if you put your head into it, you can do it. I had a lot of my classmates in college, in computer science school, where I helped them with all their assignments. They literally knew nothing. And some of them are really, really good now in the industry. And that just tells me it doesn't really matter. You definitely can learn. You just have to put your heads to it. It's possible. You just need to like it.
Yep, yep. I love it.
So, yeah, and that, honestly, like, we're coming up on, we try to keep it around an hour
Yeah.
15 minutes. So we're coming up on time, but there was one question that I really wanted to kind of touch on, and a lot of it goes back to, honestly, your background and, where you're from. I mean, Brian and I were both, Americans. We're right here, born and bred. Is there a difference in kind of how things are taught in Egypt compared to here, that now that you've kind of been all over the world and like kind of been, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, you've been in, England, you've been in America, like, is there like a huge difference in the way things are taught? Like, do you feel like you are at an advantage or disadvantage because you had your education in Egypt, or just, I mean, is
Um,
that
yeah, no, I think that's a good question. I don't know. We probably need like another 30 minutes or something, but
a
I think, yeah, there are differences in different angles. If we look at software career, there are difference. What I noticed in the developed world, like Egypt and other countries, because labor is cheaper, there are jobs that there are jobs that exist there that don't exist here as much. For example, you'll find a lot of software testers there, QA engineers that they call them, way much more than here. And those people will do testing, manual testing. You just go click on things and try things out. And there's a lot of science to it. It's not that easy of a job as people might think, and it's needed some places. And then obviously you can do test automation, but sometimes not everything is automated. It happens that there, a lot of the things can be tested manually, so that job is more prominent there than for example, the UK or the US. So there are some differences in jobs just because of how labor is laid out. Um, and then because the more developed world, like the US and Europe, they tend to want to focus on creating new tech. So you'll find more challenging jobs from software engineering perspective than what you would find generally on those countries, where those countries usually take more repetitive jobs. And I don't want to be, I mean, obviously you can find the mix, but if you're looking for a job, there is a difference when you look for a job, in Egypt versus when you do in the US. There is a big difference. The other thing I noticed also in terms of education, I don't know. I don't really have a good experience in education. I mean, I didn't have a good experience in my education. I went to a good school, but they didn't have good computer science curriculum. I think the education is probably better uh, elsewhere. You do have very sharp engineers in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and those places, no question about that. That's why companies just go and do a lot of hunting there. So Microsoft do a camp there, Google does that, Apple does that. There are very sharp people there. There are very good schools over there. I just didn't, and those are private schools. I've been to a government school. Maybe that's the public school. That was one of the reasons. Um, and then the last difference I would say is what you make. The last job I had, outside the US was the Netherlands. So I was working for a client with a company called Behold. And that company was also focused on security. And when I finished my venture there, I applied to that company, and I told them, "Hey guys, I want to work for you." They did the interview. They gave me an offer, and so I looked at the offer. I asked my friends who lived there, and they said, "Oh, this is kind of okay. It's not really on the high end. It's not on the low end." And then, so my wife was born here in the US, so we also can come here. So I asked the people in the US, and they told me, "Oh, this is nothing, man. You gotta come here. What are you doing?" So yeah, I chose not to go with this, and I came to the US. And having worked in Europe, I can tell you, obviously, you make a lot more money here. There's no question about that. You work like crazy here as well. So I heard some people talk about, oh, you have a good work-life balance here compared to Europe. That's not true. In Europe, I went to the office once on Saturday, and they went nuts on me. It's like, "What are you doing? We don't work in the weekend." I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Yeah.
It was a problem I need to fix, which is the opposite here. You're encouraged to work in the weekend, if there is a problem, and you work like crazy, but you make way much more money.
Well, and you made a good comment too at the beginning. Is currently for you, you're working to live. You're not living to work. And I think that is the flip side of the coin between, from my experience, at least from the US and the UK. It's a different
Right.
mentality there.
Yes. So if you want to live your life, just go to Europe. You're gonna make money. I feel like you can enjoy your life there if you want to slow down and have a nice meal in a nice restaurant. Exactly.
And I'm going to start widening your franchise. We'll go to the year out.
Not sure about that. It's a lot easier to open a company here than anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, shit, all you got to do is pay like $50 to open an LLC in Wyoming, and boom, you're in business.
Exactly.
But yeah, dude, come on, I can't leave the United States. I've got 5 kids. Like, I ain't going anywhere.
There you
Maybe when all 5 of those little fuckers are moved out.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for answering that. Like, that's one of those questions. Like, I'm never really sure how to ask that because I don't want it to come off a little weird or anything. But like, it's interesting to see kind of like how that differs based on the different regions. Because over the years I've had multiple engineers from India. Like at the startup we had one engineer. His name was Ramasamy. Like he was probably one of the best engineers I had. Probably one of the funniest motherfuckers I've ever hired. It was great. And, I wish I could have just like strung him along to every job that I've had after that. And it's almost a disservice, I think, to the people that are in that area that they don't get the education that people in the United States get, or the pay that we get here. And I mean, luckily, they have the opportunity to come here and get that pay and that education, but the way our visa system is set up and the immigration is just fucked beyond belief. Like, and trying to get people through the whole visa process. Oh my God, it's such a nightmare.
Yep.
But yeah, okay. So we're definitely at time. I know it's getting a little late for me. I'm on the East Coast, so it's 11 o'clock here. So I am probably going to have to dip out. If you guys want to keep going, that's totally up to you guys. But Ahmed, I definitely have enjoyed our time. Definitely think we should have you back on and probably dive into some of these other topics that we were talking about and see what else we can get into.
Well, appreciate it, Aaron and Brian. That was awesome. I love the talk. Maybe you should do it again, like you said, and we'll
sounds great.
Connect with you guys again.
Yeah, love it. Thanks.
Well, yeah, he works for you. Of course, you're going to connect with him
tomorrow.
Yeah.
In the morning.
No, we appreciate your time. We appreciate your insight. The diversity of your background is just fantastic to help our listeners learn. And that's why we're here. Again, we talk about that every episode. Is to give everyone the best understanding of what this software engineering world is like. And I couldn't find a better person to do that for. So thank you, Ahmed. Appreciate your time.
Sweet.
It's good getting to meet you and to learn more about you, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Likewise.
Take care, Ahmed. Have a good one, bud.
You too. Bye.